Hello, everybody. I'm Ryan McNeil, and this is the Builder by Day podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. On today's episode, I'm going to be discussing housing and strategies for housing the unhoused. Going back to, I guess, some of what I discussed months ago before I sort of gave up on it a bit. The last few episodes here on the podcast, we've been discussing some very housing-specific new home construction, contractor, builder advice. We drew a small home plan. We talked about the difference between architects and engineers and builders. So in other words, I did what I said I was going to do a few weeks ago or a number of weeks ago, which was to kind of go away from the political and cultural conversation, keep it kind of very black and white business, professional stuff. I had someone reach out to me and ask if they could use those two episodes as training material for professionals who are getting into the appraisal business and some other things. I am more than happy to do that. I mean, I'd love to think that I can provide some information that people might learn from. That's kind of the whole idea of doing it. But I would be lying if I said that I am content putting this much time and energy into producing a YouTube channel or a podcast, and at the same time ignoring what I consider to be the most important thing that's going on in the world right now. And that is what's going on politically and culturally in our world. I mean, I talk about this stuff all day, all the time with my wife, with my friends, with other business owners, colleagues, and family members. It's at the forefront of the conversation. And for you guys listening, I'm sure it's the same thing in your world. I didn't really want to have a, sort of a daily or weekly political podcast. But man, I'll tell you, this is just not getting any better. After the federal election, I just, it was like, okay, it's time to bow out of this. It'll be 4 more years before there's an election. We don't need to keep talking about politics. Let's just move on. The Liberals won. Carney's the prime minister. Let's see how it goes. And, we'll circle back around if or when needed. Since the federal election, I've made a conscious decision to step back from the political and cultural stuff. And it's not because I don't care. Trust me, I care. Creating content like this, podcasting, editing, writing, publishing, it pulls my attention away from my actual work, from building homes and running my business and being present even at home. So if I'm going to take the time to put that much time and energy into it, to invest that much time and energy and to hit record and to speak into this mic, then it needs to matter, right? It needs to be worth it to me in order to do it. I don't take this much time and energy to put into something, to publish it and put it out there in the public without giving it some real thought and some planning on my end. I just don't function that way. When the federal election was over, I really expected that things would calm down on that front. But they haven't done that. They've actually doubled down. These voices on the left, I don't have any other way to describe these guys other than to say they're on the left. And I've mentioned before that I don't like referring to people as left and right. There's far more nuance to it than just left and right. But these particular folks that I'm referring to, I don't know how else to refer to them other than to refer to them as the left, okay? Because they have leftist ideas and they represent these leftist ideas. I expected that after the election, that this kind of back and forth, this rhetoric, the propaganda and all those things would just settle down, but they haven't. I've been watching this unfold for the past couple of months, especially on Twitter, on X. At first, I still was staying quiet on the podcast side of things for sure. And I figured, you know what? I'll at least try to engage in the conversation online. I'll ask questions. I'll challenge people's ideas. I'll respond respectfully. But I'm trying to have an honest debate with anyone who appears, at least on their end, to also be trying to engage in some kind of debate or conversation about whatever it is that the topic is. They don't want to have a discussion. They don't want to hear another point of view. They have their marching orders, it would seem, and they have their script that they are to follow, and that is what they are sticking to. They are not looking to engage in any meaningful type of conversation. There are these accounts, that people set up, and in many cases they're anonymous. These are anonymous accounts, but sometimes with thousands or tens of thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of followers. And every single day I notice on social media, especially on Twitter, and in fairness, Twitter is the only place that I engage with anybody on social media. I engage with people from my own personal account. Every day they latch onto the same topic, all at the same time, and they start this coordinated parroting message. They're all saying the same thing. It's synthetic and it's blatantly obvious. They share each other's posts. They boost each other's replies. And they all say the same things. Like it's coming from this one central playbook. There's no way that every day these folks wake up and they all have exactly the same thought in their head. And they all start, posting almost word for word the same things on social media. There's clearly some direction being provided to these folks. And it's concerning to me. Since we've had the election, theoretically going to be, almost 4 years, 3.5 more years before we have another election. Why are these people campaigning so hard? Why is there such a deliberate and continuous and, if anything, increased effort to boost this same type of conversation and more of it and more aggressively than ever? And look, I'll be honest. These people are not smart and they're not thoughtful and they're not interested in having any conversation. They're just bought is the best way to describe them. Either literally or intellectually, they are bought and paid for. And so today what I want to do, the example I want to use, because it ties to housing, which ties to my world as a home builder, is I want to give you an example of how ridiculous this gets. And I want to show you one of the current talking points that I've seen circulating around and being pushed around by these same leftist parroting accounts on social media, specifically on Twitter. The last few weeks, I've made a conscious effort as politely as possible to try to engage with these folks. Say, look, what is it that you mean by that? When you say this, what do you mean? Where are you coming from? What makes you say that? Do you have any evidence to support that? Whatever it is that they're talking about, I'm legitimately trying to engage in the conversation. And this particular conversation is about housing and homelessness, and the housing aspect of that is right up my alley. I know housing. So in the last couple of days, what I've seen circulating around through these accounts is that they're all saying the same thing. They're saying Canada should do what Finland did to fix homelessness. I might start actually pulling up these Twitter accounts and these posts that are being made, and then maybe even include my response to these posts or show you guys what it is that I'm talking about, because I realize that not everybody uses Twitter. And in fairness, I don't blame you for not using Twitter. It is a pretty toxic, kind of nasty place. I look at Twitter as kind of like it's a public forum, but it's a public forum where theoretically there should be debate taking place. That's how I look at it, but it's not debate. It's an argument. It's not even a productive argument. It's an argument. It's name calling. And if you don't like what somebody says, you block them. And it's kind of a gong show, admittedly, but that's okay. I don't mind being, I think perhaps there is a place even for some people like myself, perhaps, who are willing to wade into those waters and engage with those people in an attempt to do it from a place of actual legitimate willingness to communicate. In the last few days, these accounts have been parroting this same message, and that is Canada should just do what Finland did to fix its homeless problem. Now, the usual voices on the left, many of them anonymous, some of them even verified, have been parroting this line nonstop. Finland ended homelessness. Why can't Canada just copy them? Why can't we just do what Finland did? And there's never any specifics. There's no questions. It's just lazy moral superiority. These people are actually taking to social media to say, hey, why don't we just do what Finland did? Why don't we just build a house for everyone that needs a house? Oh, just build a home for everyone? Oh, okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't we just give everyone a house and then poof, problem solved. No more housing crisis. Everyone has a house. Well, naturally, I thought, well, I don't know what Finland did. And I don't actually know a whole lot about Finland. I know as much about Finland as the average person does. And I thought, well, before I try to engage in this conversation, I should first look into it and see what Finland actually did. And so let me tell you what Finland actually did. I looked this up. I used AI and Google and so on, just as I would suggest any of you do. If there's something you don't know about, then just look it up. The information is there. One thing I actually did think about discussing this week, and then I kind of got hijacked by this conversation about housing, was I was going to discuss the fact that if you are not using AI, specifically, you could use like ChatGPT or Grok, or there are many others. Google has its own AI. But if you're not using AI, and if you're not at least using AI to collect information or get the information that you need for your own personal well-being and for your own personal information, then you need to start using AI. But I might touch on that next episode. And I'm not like an expert on AI, but like many people, I've discovered it, started using it more in recent months, and you got to get on board with using AI. What is it exactly that Finland did? What are these people talking about? So I looked it up. In 2008, Finland launched a strategy called Housing First. And to their credit, It seemed to have worked pretty well and perhaps worked better than maybe anything else that had been tried. But the basic idea was this. Before you try to fix someone's mental health, you get them clean, you get them a job, you give them housing. And then stable, secure housing becomes the foundation for everything else. And that approach is not new, okay? It's also not complicated. And it's also probably what 99% of the people in the world would all agree with. If you laid that out in front of them and said, hey, everybody, do you think all things being equal, if we took the people who are unhoused or homeless, and of those people who furthermore have, say, addictions or mental health issues or something else that they need further help with, do you think it would be a good idea if we could just provide them all with a place to live and all of the therapy and counseling and treatment that they need and find them a job and help them get back on their feet? Do you think that would be a good idea? Well, of course. When people say things like the solution to the housing crisis is just to give everyone a house. Well, no shit. That would be like saying the solution to cancer is to just cure cancer. People are trying to do that. It's such a lazy intellectual argument to make. But nevertheless, I wanted to look into it. So I looked into what Finland did, and here we are. This approach has been used in Canada in several pilot programs. The difference is that Finland committed to it nationally. They built over 16,000 permanent housing units with on-site support services. Remember, this started back in 2008. They integrated addiction support, psychiatric help, and social workers right into the housing infrastructure. They created legislation, bought buildings, retrofitted old apartments, and assigned caseworkers. It took them 15 plus years, political alignment across multiple governments, and a high trust society that still believes in institutional competence. You might be noticing by now that we have some differences between Canada and Finland. I'm going to talk about those in a sec. But where is Finland now? Okay, well, as of 2023, Finland has had fewer than 4,000 people classified as homeless. Over 75% of them are temporarily without housing, living with family or friends. Only about 600 people were actually sleeping rough or unsheltered. This is back in 2023. But here's the punchline. Finland's entire population is less than the greater Toronto area. Their economy, demographics, geography, and governance structure are completely different from Canada. They have no provinces, meaning there's no jurisdictional fights over funding. They don't have cities like Vancouver where addicts can legally smoke fentanyl in public. They don't have an open border immigration pressures. They don't have First Nations reserves abandoned by federal infrastructure. They don't have tent cities in the winter. And they do have a far more homogenous society, culturally, socially, linguistically, which helps with trust, program consistency, and just a general national buy-in on the program. Now, let's contrast that with Canada. In Canada, over 235,000 people experience homelessness every year. On any given night, about 35 to 40,000 people are sleeping outside or in shelters. We have 3 layers of government who are always and constantly pointing fingers at each other. They don't coordinate, they don't cooperate, they don't work together. There is no long-term national housing strategy with any real enforcement. In our major cities like Toronto and Vancouver, housing starts are often stalled by bureaucracy or NIMBYism or even just these insane permitting and development timelines that we deal with even here in my city in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And we also have an addiction crisis that's being managed with vending machines for safe supply and taxpayer-funded crack pipes. So all that is to say, Canada is not Finland. Finland is not Canada. And so to say, just do what Finland did is a ridiculously ignorant thing to say. Let's pretend that dropping a couple 100,000 free housing units into Canadian cities without support staff, without treatment programs, without fixing zoning, immigration, mental health, or governance would somehow end homelessness. Like I said, that is intellectually dishonest and lazy, and it's policy cosplay. It's also exactly the kind of thing that these leftist parrots latch onto and repeat and cheerlead for day in and day out because it sounds compassionate. For them, it feels like a win. They're not actually trying to solve anything. They're just trying to win internet points and dunk on anyone who points out the reality or points out the flaws in their genius plan. Right here, this type of example that I'm using right here is why I speak up. It's why I chime in on social media. It's why I'm sitting here today having this conversation with you guys about this very thing. Because if people like me don't say something, then this kind of delusion becomes policy. And that's already happened. We have policies in this country that are in place because people just sat back and allowed it to happen. And it's happening right here in my own city. It's happening right here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. You see it at the city council level. We're dealing with these 16 or 17, whatever it is, councillors here in the Halifax regional municipality. These people have gone completely rogue since the time they got in office back in October. Somewhere in November, they announced they're going to do away with Twitter because they find it too offensive. So they're going to do away with the most effective communication tool that the city has to communicate with the most people in the shortest amount of time. And these councillors all come together and vote. I think at the time they voted something like 13-3 in favor of no longer using Twitter to communicate via the city accounts, like to tell people about things like storm advisories or weather bulletins or public notifications of any kind. They're going to do away with it. And they want to do away with it because they find Twitter offensive, because they don't like Elon Musk and they don't like Trump. And I'm not making that up. That is what they cited. They said it didn't fit the HRM's values for inclusivity and diversity and equity and inclusion. They said all that shit. I'm not making that up. We could probably find a quote and stick it up here on the screen. It's crazy. And that's why I speak up about this stuff, because it's happening right here in my own city. Twitter was one thing. They also collectively among themselves have decided that Halifax needs to be a carbon neutral city. Ask any of them what that even means. They can't define it. And more recently and more controversially, and something that at least people are talking about here, and I've seen it locally, people speaking up about it, is this obsession they have with bike lanes. They're proposing to take one of the major streets in Halifax, a major trunk route in Halifax, Morris Street. And they're proposing the city, these city councillors on their own, not because the citizens of this city have requested it or asked for it, but these councillors on their own have decided that they want to turn Morris Street, a major trunk route, into a one-way street. This street basically runs across the city of Halifax. They want to turn this street into a one-way street because they want to put a bike lane on this street. Fewer than 1% of the people in Halifax commute via bicycle. Less than 1%. The city is spending tens of millions of dollars. It was originally supposed to be 25 or 30 million. Now they're pushing almost 100 million on these bike lanes. And then recently they throw in this idea that they're going to turn a major street into a one-lane street with a bike lane. It's so bad, in fact, that the mayor of Halifax is trying to put something in play that gives him more powers to override these other councillors that are coming up with these completely offside ideas and then voting in favor of it. And none of these ideas match what the citizens want, and they have no mandate for it. They're just coming up with this stuff on their own. It's so bad. In fact, not only is the mayor trying to step in, but the premier of the province has essentially threatened Halifax City Council to drop this, or the province will have to step in to not allow it to happen. I mean, it's just it's an absolute joke, but it is reflective of what's happening in the bigger picture in our society and in our country. It's just that this issue happens to be taking place right here in Halifax in my backyard. The other thing I've noticed these folks on the left doing when they talk about just be like Finland, oh, let's just build a home for everyone or provide an apartment for them to live or shelter, whatever it is. Their suggestion is give everyone who needs a house or a place to live, and give everyone who needs treatment, counseling, therapy, etc., all of the treatment, counseling, therapy, etc., that they need. That's their solution. Their solution is give every needy person everything they need. This conversation about the unhoused and homeless and providing housing for people and everyone getting on the same side. You're either on the side of like, give the homeless people and the unhoused people everything they need and all the treatment they need. Or some people are on the side of, no, everyone should look after themselves. But most people are somewhere in the middle of that. And they say, look, we should do what is reasonable to do, but also we can't have people living in tents. We can't have people living in public parks and so on. Most people are down the middle there. Sometimes you'll see when people talk about housing, especially like the people who are living unhoused in tents and these tent cities around the city, people will mistakenly sometimes assume or even imply that everyone who's living unhoused has addictions and or mental health problems and or they're criminals and so on. And that's not accurate, of course. Up until 5 minutes ago, people used to jump all over other people who said things like that. So if somebody implied that all homeless people are addicted to drugs or have mental health issues, then, and rightfully so, other people would jump in and say, that's ignorant to say not everybody who is unhoused has mental health issues or addictions or so on. And they're absolutely right. I know people who are currently and have been homeless or unhoused who certainly do not have any issues with addictions or mental health issues. The reason they're unhoused is because they have financial issues. And those financial issues, hopefully, are temporary for them. And once they resolve those financial issues, they're back on their feet, they have a place to live, and away they go. But I know that there are people out there who are currently unhoused, but they get up every day and go to work. They work 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week. They have a full-time job. They're unhoused. But other than not having a place to call home, they're living as normal a life as they can. But of course, they don't have a place to live, and that is troubling. And I don't think that anybody who is going to work every day should not be able to afford a place to live. That's crazy to me. But I'm not going to get into the cause and effect thing here. I just want to stay on topic for a minute. And so I just looked it up here, so I'm going to share with you. In Canada, an estimated 30 to 50% of people experiencing homelessness live with mental health conditions, and about 20 to 25% have co-occurring serious mental illness and substance use disorders. Let's go with the high number there. Let's just call it 50%. Let's say that 50% of the people who are experiencing homelessness also have issues with addictions and or mental health issues. You can't be grouping everybody who's homeless or unhoused. You can't be putting them all in the same group and assuming that they all have mental health issues and or addictions. It's just not true. But what I find really, really interesting is that in the last 2 days, with all this just be like Finland and do what Finland did conversation, that everyone who parrots this idea, they all also imply, and in some cases explicitly say, that all housing needs to come with these bolt-on services of treatment, counseling, therapy, etc. And I've seen that not just from one person, I've seen that from every single person who parrots this idea. So those who would have been the first people to jump down your throat for putting everybody in the same group are now explicitly and purposely putting everyone in the same group. They've done a complete 180. I've attempted to engage with these folks and say, yeah, but look, we're not Finland. Finland is the size of the greater Toronto area, population-wise. We have an entirely different governance structure. We have an entirely different culture, all of those things. Everything that I went over earlier, it's different. So I would say, look, that's nice and all, but your solution being just provide housing for everyone that needs it and provide all the services for everyone who needs it, and your assumption that everyone that needs housing needs counseling and treatment and so on, is inaccurate. This is just one example of what I'm running into, what I see out there in social media, out there in the world. And it's not only on social media. I mean, that's where you see most of it, because that's where you engage with far more people than you engage with in everyday regular conversation. But this is not only limited to exchanges or conversations taking place online. In real life, people are saying the same thing. Like anything, what I've always tried to do, what I currently do, what I'm doing right now, what I've tried to do in any of my podcast episodes, and just what I try to do generally in life, is I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, trying to get to the real facts of the matter, and then make decisions based on those facts. But it's funny that we live in this place here in this country where facts and truth don't seem to matter to a certain group of people. And those people represent what appears to be pretty much half of the population. These folks will deny logic and reason if it doesn't support their argument. I am all for fixing the housing crisis that we have in this country. I am all for housing the unhoused. But being unhoused, mental health issues, addictions, etc., these are symptoms caused by the problems. There are root problems And some of the symptoms of these problems are things like increasing number of people who are unhoused, increasing number of people who suffer from mental health issues, increasing number of people who have addictions. These are all symptoms of the problems. And the problems are vast. And we're not going to go into the problems today, but there's things we've talked about in the past, like inflation is a cause of these problems that we're experiencing. Mass immigration is a problem that's causing this. Just in general, poor government policy is what's causing this. We can't just address the symptoms and not address the problems and the root causes of the problems. So if somebody wants to have a conversation about housing the unhoused, then I think that's a good conversation to have. But it should involve facts and truth. And if you're going to talk about how to treat the symptoms, then you should also be talking about how to fix the problems. And if you're going to only talk about treatment of the symptoms and never talk about fixing the problems, then to me, you're like a pharmaceutical company. You're not interested in curing it. You're interested in treating it. And you want to treat it with Canadian taxpayer money. But you don't want to have a conversation about why we're paying so much tax or what programs or things should be cut in order to make the funding available to treat the homeless problem or the unhoused problem. It's a much bigger conversation. I'm going to continue to try to engage with people. I'm going to continue to try to have this conversation here for as long as I can anyway. Perhaps on the next episode, maybe I'll pull up some of these conversations that I've had. I'll share my screen. I'll show you guys the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, the kind of conversations that I'm trying to have unsuccessfully. And I'm not alone. You know, there are other people out there trying to do the same thing. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. These accounts that are parroting these ideas that continue to push this kind of conversation, this rhetoric. The only thing that makes sense to me is that these folks have to be being compensated financially one way or another to do so. For many of them, it's just about attention. The more attention you get, the more attention the algorithm will pay to your account because there's activity and engagement, and then you'll get more bot followers. And if you're after followers, really, you could take the strategy of it doesn't matter what you say, just piss off as many people as you can. And as those pissed off people scream into the void, yeah, you're being embarrassed and humiliated because you're saying stupid things every time you open your mouth, but you don't care because you're anonymous. None of these anonymous accounts are ever going to respond to you or engage with you. But then there are people who aren't anonymous. There are people who exist in real life. There are people who have podcasts like myself. It just doesn't make sense to do that unless you're being paid to do that. These folks have to be compensated in some way. And then if they're being compensated, who would compensate them other than the political party or special interest groups or whoever it might be that are interested in continuing things the way they are? They want things to continue. They want the crisis to continue. They want the chaos to continue. And so they find people who are willing to parrot these ideas online and who don't care about being humiliated or embarrassed or looking like a fool or being screamed at by people who think that they're completely out of their mind. I have yet to find anyone who is willing to engage in amicable conversation about any of these topics. They won't do it. Today's episode, we talked a bit about housing and homelessness and how to house the unhoused, and a little bit about my headspace and what I'm thinking and what I'm talking about and, you know, what I think is important and what I perhaps should be talking about versus what I am talking about, and, you know, going around in circles here, but I'm going to leave it at that. Perhaps moving forward, we'll engage a little bit more in some of these things. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks very much for listening. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.